Linh-chan and Dimi-chan play games. Hello and welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, Chan-chan.
So today we're going to continue the distant spring.
Because it is winter.
It is winter. It's very cold in LA currently, actually.
Lately.
And since we were talking about linguistics last time, we figured we'd continue that since to us it's a very fascinating topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And last time we were talking about like language acquisition from a second language learner.
Yeah, and whether there really is like a critical period where language needs to be learned within that period. If not, language acquisitions can no longer happen.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, like that critical period doesn't exist for a second language learner.
Yeah.
Right? But it is very much there for
first language learners.
For first language learners.
So like if you're a newborn baby and you've never had any input whatsoever with language,
mm-hmm.
then it's actually very critical for you to have that
input. Like I, for a very long time, have a personal theory that intelligence is not like language is not a result of intelligence, but intelligence itself is a byproduct of language. So if you don't get that language, like you don't end up getting a lot of intelligence as a result.
No, that makes sense.
And it's kind of crucial for people to get that input at an early age. Otherwise, they don't develop anything.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because, like, we live in a very social and, a social community in general. Mm-hmm. Humans in general.
We're very social animals.
We're very social animals. So having that language input allowed us to branch out more, into society. Therefore, allow us to have a chance to develop better,
And just like these two who didn't have a mama, they didn't know what to do. They were just crying. So we eat them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his nature, right?
Yeah. So, like, throughout history, there's been many cases of, like, children being left behind and having no one to care for them, like, in the forest or whatever. Like an example that we grew up with, I'm sure a lot of people grew up with the children's book, that's the Jungle Book.
Yeah.
That Jungle Book, it's pretty much about a little boy who grew up in the forest being raised by wolves. But the thing is that, like, he knew how to speak English perfectly.
Yeah, well, at least in the movie.
Or whatever language that is, The thing is that, like, without that language input, you wouldn't be able to
function.
To function like a normal human being.
You'll never be able to.
You'll never be able to. We're not saying that you aren't able to learn. You will learn. Like, you will learn from, like, the wolf's point of view of how to hunt, how to growl, how to defend for yourself. But other than that, you'll never get beyond that point. It's stuck.
Why? Like it does not shimmy.
It's like I think it's like a glitch in the game.
Is he
unless there's a hole and it just fell right in that hole?
Oh, I plucked him. No, I think it's that grasshopper thing that buried all my guys. What an asshole. I don't like that grasshopper thing. Oh, we got the zirconium rotor. What are all these pieces even used for?
It's a rocket ship. Nobody knows.
It's kind of like the brain.
Nobody knows.
All these sections. Yeah, it's that thing.
Oh.
Yeah, well, since he decided to embrace death's clutches, let's give it to him. Oh my gosh, she's so fast.
But anyway, there's many, like, if you ever search like Wild Child or something like that on the internet, you'll find like quite a handful of stories of like children's being left behind or parents just neglecting them.
Yeah, I mean,
there was this one boy not too long ago that the story came up. I think it was somewhere in Europe. How the child was being neglected by the mother in like the back of the house with like a bunch of birds. Like the mom was raising birds, all sorts of birds, and the mom was just neglecting the child with that, like not giving the child any language input.
Just locking them in a room, essentially.
Yeah, well, it wasn't like the mom was not feeding the child. The child wasn't like malnourished or anything. Like he was properly clothed, you know, had you know, normal child like growing up, you know, toys, whatever. The only thing he lacked was communication, because for some reason this cuckoo mom decided not to talk to the kid and just left the kid in the back of the house with all the birds. So he learned how to chirp.
Yeah.
That was his language input. So he learned how to chirp and communicate with all the birds. You know?
We're made to learn.
Yeah, we're made to learn.
And we're especially made to learn language.
So it's definitely really interesting, you know, like that first crucial, like, years up until puberty. It's really important to give a child as much language input as possible. You know?
It's very important.
Yeah.
And, like, although it's not exactly the same thing, like, a whole community was kind of pushed to this point of view.
Excuse me, I have to sneeze again. Excuse me. Sorry if it's too loud. I have really manly sneeze.
You have a manly sneeze?
Yeah, I've always been told that by Dimitri here.
I always encourage you need to have a softer sneeze just for my ears.
It's kind of hard when you know, when the stuff needs to come out.
It needs to come out.
It comes out, you know. You can't just stop it. Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that.
But yeah, there's a whole community that was kind of... They're not to the same extent, of course, but because there was a genetic factor that caused a lot of people to be deaf, they were kind of abandoned by their village, you know?
Yeah.
And for a long time, nothing happened. Like, oh, you have a deaf child, they stay at home. That was it.
Deaf, not deaf.
You have a deaf child, they stay at home, and that's
well,
all there is to it.
them, that's like a curse, especially like in underdeveloped countries, places where like
it's like a problem you don't want to talk about.
Yeah, it's like a problem you do not want to talk about. You know, I mean, for such a long time, even in the U.S., like people that are born deaf or has a disability, like are being shunned out from society. You know,
and as a result, they get no language input.
Yeah.
Because
it's such an interesting story when one day we'll talk more about like the deaf culture, but it's just so interesting.
Oh, let's lure these babies. And as a result, they get no language input, and I think this is in Nicaragua.
I think so. It starts with an N. I know that for sure, and the word is freaking long.
So at one point, they decided to start doing something about this. So they called in language teachers to try to teach them how to communicate. But communicate, like, these children are deaf, so they can't hear, and they were trying to teach them how to speak, like, with their with their mouths. And when you can't hear, that's a very difficult thing to do. You know?
Yeah.
Because especially if the people teaching are just like assuming you're dumb, and they're just like, why can't you do this? Then it was a huge problem. So teacher after teacher, they were not being able to help these children who were growing up thinking nothing is wrong with them, or perhaps from that naive point of view, thinking that nothing was wrong with them. And everyone being bizarre around them.
The thing is, I don't think they had any problems communicating among each other, though. I mean, home signs have been a thing that, you know, been around for such a long time.
But at the same time, it's something very basic.
Yeah, it's something very basic, enough for you to communicate with other kids, you know, around your age.
But they didn't have...
I feel like it became such a problem for society. It's because of all these scientists thinking that they know better just because they can hear and speak, coming in and trying to change a culture. I feel like most of the time that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if you had left these kids to themselves, eventually they will have come up with the language, some sort of sign language to use among themselves. And from what I understand from this research group is that it wasn't the kids didn't have any language. Like, they had a language of their own. It was a sign language that they created among themselves. And it caught a lot of these scientists' attention because it was for the first time in history that they're able to observe the development of a language from the very beginning stage of it, you know? So that's got that sort of like got everyone's attention, and then everyone kind of sort of just flooded there, and then sort of like trying to change the culture there and introduce oralism, which is oralism is a term that you use to referring to like teaching deaf people how to speak, you know?
So, from the way I remember it, it's not that these kids had a language yet. They were pretty much held in isolation for the entire time up until the 1970s, when the last group of teachers that came in were not teachers, they were linguists. And they were told, teach these kids how to speak. Like, that was what the government wanted them to do. And instead, they did something very different. They
taught them how to sign?
They didn't teach them how to sign. They just let them do their thing.
Yeah, they just watched them.
They decided that, okay, we're going to be a little cruel here, but this is a very unique opportunity because they did notice that the kids were signing to between each other.
Yeah.
But not to a very complex degree. So instead of deciding that they were going to teach them a specific sign like
an existing language,
they just decided to let them do what they were doing, and as a result they were able to observe the creation of a brand new language. And that was the very unique thing because there was no language, and then after one school generation of kids, so a school generation being like 3 years of the same kids talking to each other, they were communicating with each other, you know? Let's look at these guys here. And after a second generation, the language evolved.
Yeah, like, because that original group that created that language had already graduated or moved on. So whatever was left over with the younger children, like, it was very limited. So they ended up developing or improving that what they had learned into a more complex way of communicating. So like over like the past 10 years, this language had developed into like a full-fledged
mature language.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
Like, a lot of people talk about like a language at its maturity when it has like a written language that's associated with it, but that can't be said of sign language. Like, there's not always a written language there, you know?
Yeah, and sign language evolves over time. Even for American Sign Language, as new technology, as new things evolve or come up, they need to come up with a sign to call these things, you know? So, like, and also, like, it's not a matter of just coming up with signs. Like, I know for American Sign Language, like, it's a community of people coming together, like, and it's not like scholars that come together. It's pretty much like normal people coming together and like talking among themselves. Like, oh, did you see the new Apple phone, like the new iPhone that came out? And they're like, what can we call this thing? Like, oh, let's come up with a sign for it. And it's just like that sign started to spread around.
Yeah, organically.
Organically spread among the community, and like over time, the sign just sort of changed because people don't like the way they use those symbols, or you know. So it's really interesting. So American Sign Language changes all the time. You know, any language really, if you think about it. And
the most amazing thing of this Nicaraguan Sign Language story is it happened in the 70s. So it hasn't been very long since, but in those first 10 years, it became a full language. It had complex structure, complex vocabulary, and it wasn't adults that came up with this.
Yeah.
That's the crucial thing. It was entirely just kids put together as a group, not isolated in their homes, but together all as a group, and they all created not not intentionally. Like, they weren't like, okay, we need a word for apple. Let's think.
Yeah, like they didn't.
They just did it by chance, and then there might have been multiple words for apple originally, but then the one that made the most sense to the most people kind of organically won.
Yeah, and that's how sign language still is today. You know, it's all constantly evolving with all these new technologies that we keep coming up with. You know?
Yeah, and the same can be said of like every language.
Yeah, the same can be said with every language, really.
My favorite example of this is like in French. Computers were invented, I'd say, a fairly long time ago now.
Whatever.
But in French, they did not want to use the word computer or computer because that had an existing meaning already, and it was someone who manually tabulated.
Yeah, someone who computes.
Someone who computes. And like, they didn't want to do that. So they invented a new word, an ordinateur, to be special. Ordinateur. Because now it's something that orders things. And it's like, it works in both ways. Words can organically come up and change meaning and be used.
But didn't you say that the French language didn't really change much the past thousands of years? Like,
oh no, it didn't.
They're teaching you what people were learned back in like the 17th century, aren't they?
Much farther. You can pick up a French book from the 1500s and understand it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Like, how are they able to keep that language?
Well, they just resisted change.
That's
any change that came up, they're like, no, we can't change computer. That has a meaning. We need to come up with a new word for this, guys. And that's the French Academy.
You stubborn old French. They're stubborn and they're perverted.
Thank you. See you next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan. Linh-chan Dimi-chan chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan chan. Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi. Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan Dimi-chan, Linh-chan chan. Linh-chan Dimi-chan.